Hello and welcome to another episode of Ain't It Scary with Sean and Carrie. I'm the titular Sean.
And I'm the very titular Carrie.
It's the show that takes you inside the unbelievable, the unexplainable, the macabre, and the bizarre and tries to find an answer. Hi, Caroline.
Hi.
How are you today?
Well, my tummy hurts a little bit. But it's a very nice day. We finally are out of daylight savings. Right? We're saving it.
Yeah, we are
for now.
saving it.
We saved it.
Yeah, the Senate, I think, just passed a bill to...
Well, I was going to say, those of us with SAD, seasonal affective disorder, what up? We'll be very happy to know that the Senate just passed a bill to make basically springtime hours for daylight savings. I mean, there's no daylight savings. They want to keep the springtime hours all year long.
Right. Which would eliminate all this pointless back and forth jumping. Although I do love the fallback night when you get the extra hour. It is beautiful.
Just sleep an extra hour.
But then you just lose it on the other side. It sucks.
Exactly.
It sucked this time. It was a Saturday. And it was like, oh, are we going to bed this late?
Yeah. It switched before we even made it to bed, so we were a little confused. But yeah, so it has to go to the House and then the President. But I think even if it does pass, it's not going to start until November 2023. But I'm excited.
Well, so you've got at least one more period of daylight savings to get through here.
But I'm excited about it.
Great. Well, look at you, Carrie, playing sick like Michael Jordan with that famous flu, the flu game.
With the infected pizza or whatever, his conspiracy theory.
In The
is.
Last Dance, he says, that some jazz fans brought him an infected pizza.
We'll have to cover those accusations when we do some sports conspiracies.
Oh, maybe a sports conspiracy roundup would be a good episode.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm sure there's a ton of stuff there.
And if you like sports conspiracies or things to do with sports and the spooky, you can head on over to our Patreon and maybe throw in a few bucks, and you can get access to our Curse of the Bambino mini-sode.
And you can also listen to our Walt Disney episode for some truly grisly details about the possible location of Ted Williams' head. Yeah,
spoiler alert, there's a tuna can involved.
Anyway, that's not the horrible thing we're talking about this week. Caroline, we've spent almost a month now with quietly creeping horrors, like the slow death at sea aboard a drifting lifeboat, or the apparition of a mourning lover in a nearby cemetery. I wanted to liven things up a little bit with some old-fashioned axe murder. I don't know how else to put it.
Well, that's grim too, Sean.
It is, but it's grim in a different way. Axe murders they feel like the most violent of murders, don't they?
I mean, short of what? A wood chipper, maybe? They're pretty rough. Because
of the force involved and the brutality. Axes aren't as sharp as knives or swords, obviously. So
it's like stabbing mixed with blunt force trauma.
Yeah, axes are made for splitting wood, so the injuries they leave on human beings are horrible, whether they're fatal or not. And so it is with an eye toward that we are going to...
This is your idea of livening things up?
And so, maybe I should reword. And so with that in mind, we are going to embark on 2 to 3 weeks, Caroline, of axe murder discussion. It's kind of a topic we've flirted with before on this podcast with Hinterkaifeck and with the Keddy Cabin murders. Those were both axe murders of whole families. And we will touch on another one of those, perhaps the most famous one, at least in the U.S., with the Valiska Axe Murder next week. Next week's episode. This week, we are going to talk about one of America's first known serial killers, or certainly a very early one. And this is, I'm sure you've heard of him, Caroline, the Axeman of New Orleans.
He's the Axeman.
Is that a real song?
I don't know. Isn't that like Scatman? Is the
yes,
YouTube?
Okay.
I always think of that.
Well, because there is an Axeman's Jazz, but...
oh, my.
We'll hear a little clip of that later on in the episode.
Oh, and I love that Beatles song as well, Axeman.
Well, it's one of the great side one-track ones of all time, Carol. The Axeman of New Orleans was an early American serial killer of at least 7 and maybe more than 12 victims, known only by his preferred method of murder, since the crimes remain unsolved to this day.
And he was what, big on suffocation?
Yes, exactly. You've guessed his MO perfectly, Carrie. No, the Axeman would break into the homes of his victims, usually through a back door, and then bludgeon them in their sleeps with the titular axe, before leaving with all of his break-in tools and the axe itself discarded in the backyard. A seemingly random crime that left neighborhoods of New Orleans utterly panicked as these crimes mounted.
I could imagine.
A version of the Axeman, if this sounds familiar to the listener, but they can't quite place it, a version of the Axeman appeared in American Horror Story, in that horrible Coven season that took place in New Orleans.
You say horrible, but that's a lot of people's favorite.
Well, okay. I didn't need to see... I didn't need Precious around for as long as she was, is all I'm saying.
We get it. You hate women.
Let the record show I love women. Danny Huston, or Houston? How do you say that actor's name?
Houston.
Danny Houston, who always portrays like an amoral, evil, slightly charming greasebag. He's great at it. He showed up as the ghost of the Axeman on American Horror Story Coven, which you probably recall.
I saw it a long time ago, but I remember him being on the show.
Now, the Axeman possibly engaged in, or I would venture to say probably engaged in, 2 separate crime sprees in New Orleans, but it was the second that raised the public alarm and kind of created the legend of the New Orleans Axeman that we have today.
And people think that this is the same person?
Yes, and when I lay it out for you, I think it seems a lot like it was the same person, yes. Now, a lot of our facts for this week come from the work of Miriam C. Davis, a historian who wrote The Axeman of New Orleans, The True Story.
Well, it sums it up.
This has been covered by other true crime writers throughout the century since these crimes happened, but this is kind of the most comprehensive work that I've seen on the crimes.
Now, because you keep saying the Axeman and not like Joe Smith, does that mean that this is an unsolved, unidentified type of thing?
That is correct. Like a sort of American Jack the Ripper, and maybe even more on that connection later on. Because this isn't too far from the time of Jack the Ripper. I'm going to start with this second wave of crimes, because that's when this really became something the public was aware of. And so, on December 22nd, 1917, Anna Andolina woke up to her husband, grocer Epifanio Andolina. There's going to be a lot of very Italian names in this story, because these murders, many of them anyway, took place in the French Quarter, which at the time was
Italian.
It was an Italian neighborhood, yeah.
Very interesting.
Well, what had happened was, in the second half of the 1800s, Italian immigrants, becoming Italian Americans, flocked to the South to fill in the hard labor jobs on plantations that were kind of being opened up by the destruction of slavery. And so, Italians with no other prospects in this country came to do those really brutal, hard jobs. But it was a job that you could maybe put aside a little money for yourself and eventually open a business. And many of these Italians who had put some money aside for themselves moved out of the country, and when they came to New Orleans, they settled in the... a lot of them, I think, were abandoned at this point till these Italian immigrants moved in and took over these old French townhouses in the French Quarter. So that was very much an Italian neighborhood. So Epifanio Andolina, grocer, was on the ground when his wife woke up. There was a man standing over him, wielding a hatchet in one hand and a revolver in the other.
Oh.
As Anna sat up, the intruder pointed his pistol at her, ordered her quiet, and then whacked her husband a few more times with the axe. And then he turned and left the room, and she heard her sons, John and Salvador, start to cry from the next room.
Aw.
Anna obviously rushes in to check on the boys, and meanwhile, the intruder had apparently moved through a different room, then back through her bedroom and out the back door.
Were they okay?
Yeah, she found the two boys crying and on the ground out of bed, both having been hit on the head with the axe, but not badly injured. They both recovered.
Were they hit with the hard or the sharp part?
It said bashed. I think they were hit with the blunt side of the axe.
Well,
and it's almost like he ran in there to throw up a distraction, like, here, you got to check on the kids, and then he escaped out the back. Nothing was taken from the home, and the man had gotten in by chiseling a panel out from the back door to slip in. Both the panel and the chisel were left behind on the door outside. Now, Epifanio and both of his sons would recover from their injuries.
Oh.
But obviously a terrifying thing for this family to wake up to.
Yeah, absolutely. But thank God they survived.
Yeah, thank God. Now, it was only 5 months later, May 23rd of 1918, that another Italian grocer, Joseph Maggio, and his wife Catherine were attacked while sleeping in their bed. And in this case, the attack would prove fatal. The couple's throats were both cut with a straight razor while they were sleeping, and then the intruder bashed both of their heads with an axe before he left. Maybe to confuse the cause of death, it's not totally clear.
Or he had to get that axe in there somehow.
Yeah, I guess. He's like, I am the axe, this is my thing.
Ugh, how terrible.
Now, Catherine's throat had been cut so deeply that her head was nearly severed from its shoulders. Joseph, on the other hand, survived for roughly 2 hours, laying there in bed, until his brother Andrew, who lived in the apartment next door, says he was summoned by the gurgling sounds, gurgling and groaning sounds of his brother.
Horrible.
So the brothers, Andrew and Jake, I think it was actually Andre and Jacob, these are super Italian guys, like first generation Italian Americans. They discover the couple, and Joseph, they said, died just minutes after his brothers discovered him.
At least he wasn't alone.
I suppose so. Police were immediately suspicious of Andrew. They were like, what, you live next door and you didn't hear the intruder come in? You didn't hear any of this? Now, Andrew said that he was leaving for the Navy, like the next day or very soon, and so he had been at a going-away party and come home really drunk, and he said, I wouldn't have heard anything at, around 2 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
The murder weapon, shedding more suspicion, was found to be a straight razor belonging to Andrew, who owned a barber shop on Camp Street. And one of Andrew's employees said that Andrew had recently brought that razor home to have a nick repaired. So police actually did suspect him for a little while, but they couldn't poke holes in his story, and eventually moved on to the nondescript man that Andrew said he had seen lingering near the premises when he came home.
What would his motive have been?
There wasn't one. I mean, I really don't think this guy did kill his brother and wife.
Yeah, that's a weird choice.
And a lot of the... Well, we'll get into it later, but this is one that I do think the Axeman probably did. Yeah, and maybe his crimes were accelerating because just a month later, on June 27th, grocer Louis Besame and his mistress, Harriet Lowe, were sleeping in the quarters at the back of his grocery store when Besame was hit with a hatchet over his right temple. When police arrived, both he and Lowe were unconscious, she from a hack over her left ear. They were discovered by delivery driver John Zanka at 7 in the morning, both on the ground and, of course, bleeding from their heads. A hatchet belonging to Besame was found in the bathroom, but Besame said that he was sleeping when the attack began.
And they both survived?
They did both. Well, they both survived for some time. Police arrested 41-year-old Louis Ubicon in the attack. He was a black man who worked in the store, despite the fact that there's so many names in this one. Harriet Lowe, the mistress, had said that the attacker had been mixed race, she thought. But the police just arrested this guy who worked at the store who was a black guy because they said he gave conflicting accounts of where he had been that morning.
Okay.
Now, robbery had been given by the police as the only possible motive, although there was nothing of value missing from the store. So they're knocking it out of the park so far.
I mean, yeah, sometimes people just like killing.
Harriet Lowe had taken a nasty blow to the head and was in and out of consciousness in the hospital. That's why police initially dismissed her statement that she thought it was a guy of mixed race or a lighter-skinned guy, because police said she was hysterical from her injuries. And I don't know, she did say a lot of things. Lowe later said in the hospital that it may have been Besame who attacked her.
Oh.
And meanwhile, investigators had found a trunk in his shop that was full of letters in German, Russian, and Yiddish. And so putting two and two together, these local New Orleans cops immediately arrested Besame on suspicion of being a German spy.
Just because he spoke German?
Yep, he had all those letters that they couldn't read, and this lady said maybe he hit her with an axe.
I mean, maybe find a German that could translate them.
He was released 2 days later, and the two lead investigators on that case were demoted from their posts for unacceptable police work.
Yeah, it's fair.
Meanwhile, a small media firestorm developed around this case because they got wind that Lowe was Besame's mistress and not his wife. Meanwhile, the wife came back from out of town, and he got in trouble for cheating, but also was dealing with suspicion around this murder that had happened right next to him. Then Lowe was released from the hospital and immediately moved back into the home that she was sharing with Besame because his wife had shown him the door.
So much drama.
And meanwhile, she had to have reconstructive surgery to fix the damage to her head and face. And a botched surgery would, it sounds like, ultimately take her life because she died in the hospital a couple of months later. But before that, she once again said that Besame had attacked her.
Wow.
Lots
of twists and turns.
Yeah, so he was charged with the murder of Harriet Lowe and spent 9 months in jail, but the jury took only 10 minutes to acquit him on May 1st, 1919.
Was the hatchet that was found in the bathroom the weapon?
The hatchet that was, yes, that was the murder weapon.
So it's interesting. So it seems like this guy is
using weapons
breaking
of opportunity.
In. Yeah. So what does he do if they don't have an axe?
Well, a few times we'll see the word meat axe, and a lot of these crimes are taking place in groceries, so he probably can usually find something sharp.
What an interesting way to choose your victims.
Well, let's talk about grocers, because I have mentioned, I think we've had 3 victims and 3 Italian grocers, right?
Yep.
So, according to the Smithsonian Institute, Italian immigrants owned 7% of the grocery stores in New Orleans in 1880. That was, almost 40 years before this. Now, by 1900, they owned 19% of the grocery stores in New Orleans. And by 1920, just a couple of years after this, they would own 50% of the grocery stores in New Orleans. So those same Italian immigrants who had been working the plantations for a few decades were putting aside some money, now able to own businesses, and this was the business that many of them had moved into.
Well, my people know their food.
That's true, but they also were not really considered white by the white inhabitants of New Orleans yet. They weren't. They were sort of considered above black people, who were unfortunately still treated very badly, obviously, under basically a Jim Crow system. But they were not treated as full citizens with all of the rights you would expect.
Yep.
Decatur Street, which was right in the middle of the French Quarter and home to many of these Italian homes and businesses, was nicknamed Vendetta Alley. Because apparently the Sicilians specifically in the neighborhood, who are described by histories of the time as tough and clannish, would find that they didn't get a lot of help from the cops and end up settling their disputes the old-fashioned way.
Well, if you're not being provided assistance, how else are you supposed to do things?
Exactly right. But I'm just giving you an idea of what the vibe in the French Quarter at the time.
We're part Sicilian, Sean. Would you describe my family as tough and clannish?
Yeah, those are 2 words I would use. Yeah, absolutely.
Tough.
Sticking together.
Well, I mean, most families should do that, right?
Yeah, and like with all of your past boyfriends, from what I understand, when I first met your dad, he positioned me like under the rifle in the living room.
Well,
to give me a talking to. So yeah, he's an intimidating guy.
my great-grandfather was invited to be in the mafia, and he turned it down.
Oh, not too much, Carrie.
Or
loose lips, loose lips.
Did he?
Now, on August 10th, 1918, it could be that the Axeman struck again. We don't know that all of these crimes were committed by him, and I don't know that this man was a grocer. Not that everyone the Axeman attacked necessarily was a grocer. But an elderly Italian man, Joseph Romano, was living with his nieces, Pauline and Mary Bruno, in the French Quarter. Pauline and Mary were awoken the night of August 10th by commotion in their uncle's room next door to them. They rushed in to find Joseph with 2 open wounds in his head and the assailant fleeing out the back door. Now, they said they saw a dark-skinned, heavy-set man with a slouched hat and a dark suit. I'll note here that every physical description of the Axeman is of a light-skinned or white man, except for this description. So either bad vision or different guy would be my guess. But
it's also nighttime. I mean, could be shadows.
Everyone
He's wearing
looks
a hat.
shadowy. Now, Romano was able to walk to the ambulance once it arrived with these 2 gaping holes in his head, but he ultimately died from the trauma 2 days later. His home had been ransacked, but police found nothing of value had been taken. Oh, and I take that back. I'm pretty sure this one was our guy, because there was a bloody axe left in the backyard, and a back door panel had been found chiseled away for the assailant to slip in through the back.
Was it Romano's axe?
That I don't know. I don't have information on that. But he did leave it behind. Now panic began to erupt in New Orleans as it became clear a maniac killer was on the loose.
Mm-hmm. Now, what was the vibe by, like, kind of, I guess, the upper classes? Were they thinking, oh, these are just, like, immigrant murders, we don't really care? Or was there actual fear by, like, people who are more wealthy or more well-off?
Well, after this one, once the bodies are starting to pile up, panic did start to... Because earlier in August, actually 5 days before this murder, there had been another murder that this one I don't think was related. But a 28-year-old pregnant woman named Anna Schneider had been attacked early in the morning by a dark figure standing over her bed who bashed her in the face repeatedly. She was discovered after midnight when her husband came home late from work with her scalp cut open and her face all covered in blood. She remembered nothing else about the attack.
She survived?
And gave birth to a healthy baby girl 2 days later.
Damn.
Yeah.
Badass.
I'm sorry, and maybe not an axe. I've just got axes on the brain, but police said
I'm not going to make that joke.
Oh yeah, fair enough. The likely weapon in this case was a lamp, they said, that had been moved from a nearby table. That she was just hit in the face repeatedly with that. An ex-con named James Gleason was arrested after fleeing police who approached him to question him about the incident. He was released because there was no evidence at all.
Maybe he just wasn't a fan.
And the lead investigators, with basically nothing to give the public about, like, we have a guy, started speculating publicly that maybe all these murders are connected. We've got a maniac on the loose. And while Anna Schneider's attack doesn't fit the MO of our killer, they were correct that the previous murders were likely all connected, as was Joseph Romano's on the 10th. So, after the Romano murder went public, panic sort of erupted in New Orleans. The police began receiving tons of reports of men with axes lurking in dark alleys. Several men called the police to report they had found axes in their backyards, or chisels, or other tools that you could use to get into a home. But interestingly, among all of the panic, and maybe because of all the gangs of armed men literally patrolling the streets at night, no more killings were attributed to the Axeman that year.
Too much heat.
Too much heat, maybe. But there was a lot of speculation, as Police Superintendent Frank Mooney said the city was dealing with a murderous degenerate who gloats over blood.
Yeah.
A retired... it was noted that a lot of the victims were Italian, or all of the victims.
Yes. Yeah.
And a retired detective named John D'Antonio hypothesized publicly that not only were the murders connected, but they were likely committed by the same person who had killed several people back in 1911 in a similar manner. D'Antonio described to the newspapers a person of dual personalities who killed without motive. A, quote, real-life Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
That was like the epitome of horror at this time.
Right. Now, as anyone who's seen like Mindhunter on
Netflix. Yeah.
On Netflix will know, until like the early 70s, the idea of a serial killer wasn't really, the modern idea of a serial killer wasn't really in the police lexicon or the public consciousness. Mm-hmm. Stuff like Jack the Ripper was just like, oh, this was weird. But there wasn't like a name or a profile for this behavior.
Yeah, and there wasn't the greater public knowledge, and even, probably to some police of like, well, sometimes people kill because they like to do it.
Right. And you don't see anyone really consider in the 70s, they'll consider the like psychosexual component of these murders and stuff. You don't see that really in
Well, it's too tawdry, Sean.
Well, but you do see discussion of that in the Jack the Ripper case where it's unavoidable because he's murdering prostitutes.
Exactly.
But a real-life Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So, several people killed in 1911. Let's go back to the dark beginnings of the Axeman. And it starts actually even before 1911, because on August 13th of 1910, someone broke into the home of grocer August John Crudy and his wife Harriet. Crudy, C-R-U-T-T-I, Italian name, and once again we're dealing with a grocery store owner here. Whoever came in forced open the kitchen door with a railroad shoe pin and proceeded to wake John up with axe blows to the head and chest.
Terrible way to get up.
Yeah.
Terrible alarm.
When a bewildered and terrified Harriet sat up in bed, the assailant waved a meat cleaver at her and demanded money.
So he's always double-fisting weapons.
Maybe cleaver blows. They sometimes they use cleaver. They use the words meat axe.
Meat axe.
Meat axe, which I think is a meat cleaver.
Maybe they're confused, so they're like, let's just do half and half.
I mean, they say he had axe wounds to his head and chest, but they say he was waving a meat cleaver, and then they say the meat axe later on.
The meat axe.
So he's got a picture a meat cleaver, I suppose. He's waving it at Harriet and demanding money. Harriet grabbed some bills from a box under the pillow, and the attacker wordlessly grabbed the money out of her hand. And on the way out, he took Crudy's caged mockingbird and left.
Insult to injury.
He would...
Imagine someone stealing Poe after beating us up.
I know.
That's horrible.
Well, Poe would come back, though, which is nice. Because this guy jumped the fence, walked a block away, and freed the bird on a nearby stoop. Obviously,
weird thing to do.
The bird obviously did not come back like Poe would. But a block away, Poe's going to be able to find home.
I hope so. I don't like thinking about that. What a weird thing to do.
Now, this is the first time we get a description of the attacker, although it is the earliest attack. Harriet said that the man who threatened her was white, in his mid-30s, about 5'6", with broad shoulders, clean-shaven with dark hair, and wearing a working man's shirt, dark trousers, and a black derby hat. Now, working man's shirt is a specific style of shirt of the time, but, it's a shirt with buttons down the front. I only say that because they say working man's shirt repeatedly in this story. The following month, on September 20th, grocer Joseph... Oh, by the way, Crudy survived his injuries. This was not a murder, but it was a very scary attack. On September 20th, grocer Joseph Risetto and his wife Conchetta were attacked in their sleep with a meat axe.
Was it a cleaver? Was it an axe? We don't know.
Yeah, I have in my notes here, meat cleaver, question mark. Now, Joseph was hit twice in the face, Conchetta once in the face and once in the neck.
Oh, God.
And the attacker fled out and over the front yard fence without taking anything from the home.
Well, they didn't have a bird, I guess.
Yeah, he's only interested in avian treasures.
Man.
Now, Joseph, obviously horribly injured, managed to pull his pistol out of his bedside drawer and fire it in the air to attract attention, and his neighbors rushed over, got the couple medical help, and both Rosettos survived.
Wow.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And what Miriam Davis points out is these early attacks are, I mean, this is what you see with serial killers sometimes is, she describes them as tentative. I don't know if I'd describe waking someone up with a meat cleaver to the face tentative, but if you hit them twice, once in the neck, and you don't kill them, I don't think this guy knew what he was after quite yet.
Well, I think he's still figuring out his urges. The thought just occurred to me kind of psychologically. Do you think that the bird thing could point to this guy being like an ex-con of some sort?
The bird, like he felt bad about the caged bird?
Yeah.
Police did think that he was likely an experienced criminal because he was obviously good at burglary.
Well, he was good at breaking in.
Right. That's the burglary part of burglary.
Oh.
So they said probably an experienced professional burglar. So someone like that could definitely be in and out of prison or know people who are. Mm-hmm. But there's no solid evidence that he was in jail before this time. Mm-hmm. He may have taken a break or maybe just stayed quiet until the following summer. But on June 27th, the Axeman would make what was possibly his first fatal attack. So June 27th, 1911... this person broke into the home and, yes, grocery of Joe and Mary Davy. The Davies' window was pried open with a railroad pin, just like we saw a few attacks ago. Mm-hmm. Now, Joe Davy, very careful for a grocer. Joe kept...
Grocers can be careful.
Well, but Joe kept water bottles propped up over the bedroom door so that if someone was trying to come in, he had like a makeshift burglar alarm. Mm-hmm. And he had a revolver on the bedside table, on top of the bedside table. So that those water bottles fall, Joe's just grabbing and firing.
That's smart.
It is smart when there's rumors of somebody attacking Italians in your neighborhood, I guess.
We have an alarm system, and no one's, knock on wood, attacked Italians in our neighborhood.
I know, but it just seems like...
You don't have alarms back then, so you got to make do. There's probably a little crime going on, things like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe he owed some people money.
Well, but again, a lot of the historians do say a lot of these Italian businessmen in the area were solving their problems with each other with violence. So you sort of had to stay frosty in that way, too.
Yeah.
Regardless, the water bottle alarm didn't work out for Joe Davy in this case because the intruder quietly disarmed the water bottles. And Mary Davy woke up to find someone ransacking through the dresser with her husband grievously wounded beside her.
How did the intruder know about the water bottles?
He must have just seen them. This is one of the reasons police say he was an experienced burglar. He was looking for countermeasures like that.
Interesting.
And knowing how to pass without trace, if you will. Joe Davy had been beaten with an axe with such force that there was a 15-degree angle depressed into the mattress after his body was removed. And so here, maybe we see a little escalation from those earlier attacks. These are not tentative blows. Mm-hmm. These are serious, I'm going to kill you now blows. Now, when the figure in the room heard Mary, he turned and demanded money, and picked up a porcelain mug and decked her in the face with it.
Oh.
And then fled without taking anything, despite his request for money. Mary said the attacker was white, clean-shaven, spoke unaccented English, and he wore a working man's shirt and black pants. Joe was never able to provide details. Unfortunately, he was rushed to the hospital, but died from his injuries the following day. That was the last attack before 1917, and if this is the same attacker, it's not clear why he took a 6-year break.
Maybe he got busted and went to jail.
That's the most likely thing. That's what Davis thinks, and that's what I think, certainly. That this guy was, a professional criminal, and he was picked up for something else, probably burglary. And he spent 6 years safely locked away, not for murder.
Could this guy have been some kind of mafia enforcer?
That has been brought up. The mafia didn't... We can talk about this a little more later, but the mafia didn't exist fully yet.
Well, okay, street gang enforcer.
Yeah, because the way some of these businesses were being operated was a little bit of a gang mentality with all the kind of vendettas and violence. And so there were enforcers, and there were protection rackets, and there were types of organized crime beginning to develop in these neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. And so it has been raised, and we will throw around some specific names later, actually. The possibility's been raised that this could have been an enforcer type, or just the product of many separate vendettas between Italian families. Mm-hmm. Or vendetti, if you will.
Well, thank you.
But I think there's a more compelling theory to subscribe to, and we can get into that later as well, of course. For now, we're going to get back to the present, or at least the present of 1919, and get to the rest of the Axeman's crimes after the break.
Ooh.
You awaken in a cold sweat. Your heart races, and your breath quickens. It's 3 a.m., and you're not alone. Something lurks in the corner of the room, and it's darker than the night.
The people are real, and the stories are legend.
The problem is that legends are often riddled in myth.
We uncover the truth and define paranormal. Tune into Paratruth Radio at killerpodcast.com, powered by Evergreen Podcasts, or wherever great podcasts are heard.
Welcome back. When last we left you, we had finished our flashback into the grisly attacks of 1910 and 1911 on Italian grocers in New Orleans, and we're flipping back to the modern day of 1919. Now remember, Carrie, there haven't been any murders for almost a year since the previous August. And the panic level in the city is starting to die down about these Axeman attacks. Mm-hmm. When on March 10th of 1919... screams were heard from the home of Charles and Rosie Cordemelia in Gretna, Louisiana, a small suburb of New Orleans. Now, 69-year-old grocer and neighbor Orlando Giordano rushed across the street to investigate. That's right, the Cordemeglias lived in their home and grocery across the street from the Giordanos in their home and grocery.
There's a Starbucks on every corner.
Yes, exactly. As Orlando got there, Rosie was standing in the doorway with a serious head wound. In her arms, she clutched the body of infant Mary, the couple's daughter, who had been killed with a single blow to the back of the neck. Mm. Charles was behind her, bleeding on the floor with another blow to his head. Both Cordemelia adults would survive with serious skull fractures, but of course Mary wouldn't make it. And nothing was stolen from the house. And yes, Carrie, before you ask, a back door panel had been chiseled away, and a bloody axe had been left on the back porch. Now, Charles was home from the hospital just 2 days later, but Rosie was in and out of consciousness and had to be held for a little while longer. When she woke up, and it sounds like after police and prosecutors had had a chance to talk to her, she was saying that Orlando Giordano, the man who had discovered her, had done the attack, along with his 18-year-old son, Frank.
Wow.
Now, Orlando was, like I said, 69 years old and in poor health. And Frank was over 200 pounds and over 6 feet tall and unlikely to fit through the back panel of the back door.
I was going to say, it was nice of Orlando to run over and try to assist. He could have let him be and gotten rid of some of the competition.
Well, exactly, but that's kind of the point. They were competition, and so along with the police, I think, putting pressure on Rosie, she might have seen an opportunity to get rid of a neighbor who had apparently just sued her over something a couple of months before.
And then went to help.
He's not a monster.
I know, it's just very interesting.
Now, Charles actually aggressively denied his wife's claims and ultimately divorced her after the murder trial was over.
Whoa.
But on the strength of Rosie's testimony, eyewitness testimony, Frank was sentenced to die, and Orlando was sentenced to life in prison.
Whoa.
Meanwhile, over in New Orleans, the police commissioner, Frank Mooney, was proclaiming that this was definitely the work of his maniac from the previous summer. It was a full year later when Rosie admitted she had falsely accused the Giordanos. She said she had a dream where the Virgin Mary came. I don't want to speak out of turn. She had a dream where a religious figure came, a saint or the Virgin Mary came and told her she had to tell the truth, and it would set her free. The Giordanos were released because there was no evidence connecting them to the crime
I'd divorce her too. I mean, I know she's a victim, but shit.
Yeah. And like I said, the families were business competitors, so it might not have been too hard to push her to deliver that false testimony. But for the police, they didn't want to hear any talk about serial killers. They saw, look, we deal with these Italians all the time. This is what they do. They shoot each other. And so police thought,
Do they axe each other?
Well, that's a great point, Carrie. And I'm not saying it was good police work. Again, the back door panel's chiseled away. I think it's pretty clear Axeman work. And ultimately, the Giordanos were released, thankfully, after that.
Yeah.
Remember I said this had more connections to Jack the Ripper? Mm-hmm. We're not murdering prostitutes here. We're not murdering anyone, but our killer's not murdering prostitutes here.
I hope we're not murdering prostitutes, Sean.
Our killer's not murdering prostitutes here, but he did take on a Jack the Ripper affectation that suggests that he was at least very familiar with that crime. Because a letter was delivered to the New Orleans Times-Picayune on March 13th, 1919.
A classic Dear Boss?
A Dear Boss letter, if you will. The Times-Picayune might not have been sure of what to do with such a letter because they published it several days later. It reads as follows. Hell, March 13th, 1919. And you'll recall, of course, Gary, that famously one of those Ripper letters says from hell at the top.
Big fan.
So this guy's a big fan. Esteemed mortal, they have never caught me, and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that surrounds your earth. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. I am what you Orleanians and your foolish police call the Axeman. When I see fit, I shall come and claim other victims. I alone know whom they shall be. I shall leave no clue except my bloody axe, besmeared with blood and brains of he whom I have sent below to keep me company. If you wish, you may tell the police to be careful not to rile me. Of course, I am a reasonable spirit. I take no offense at the way they have conducted their investigations in the past. In fact, they have been so utterly stupid as to not only amuse me, but His Satanic Majesty, Francis Joseph, etc. But tell them to beware. Let them not try to discover what I am, for it were better that they were never born than to incur the wrath of the Axeman. I don't think there is any need of such a warning, for I'm sure the police will always dodge me, as they have in the past. They are wise, and know how to keep away from all harm. Undoubtedly, you Orleanians think of me as a most horrible murderer, which I am. But I could be much worse if I wanted to.
Fuck off.
If I wished, I could pay a visit to your city every night. At will, I could slay thousands of your best citizens, for I am in close relationship with the Angel of Death.
It's big talk from someone who leaves half of the victims alive.
Only at the beginning, Carrie. He's getting better.
I don't think that's better, but okay.
Now, to be exact, at 12:15 earthly time...
Fuck off.
On next Tuesday night, I'm going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I am going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned.
A full band?
If everyone has a jazz band going, well, then so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it out on that specific Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe. Well, as I am cold and crave the warmth of my native Tartarus,
Fuck off.
and it is about time I leave your earthly home, I will cease my discourse, hoping that thou wilt publish this, that it may go well with thee. I have been, am, and will be the worst spirit that ever existed, either in fact or realm of fantasy. The Axeman.
This guy sucks.
So, lengthy letter. He seems to like the look of his own prose, if not the sound of his own voice. Mm-hmm. One interesting thing that a couple of writers I read pointed out is that this appears to be a letter from obviously a literate person, obviously a person who was up on...
Tartarus.
And a person who was up on, the events of the past few decades, even abroad. He had read about Jack the Ripper.
It's basically a Jack the Ripper fanfic.
It is a Jack the Ripper fanfic. He's putting on more airs than Jack, though. Jack had some maybe on purpose misspellings and stuff. This guy wants to appear very erudite, and he references current events and the Bible and
Jazz.
Jazz, of course. That's an interest. Yeah, we'll touch on that in a moment. But some writers have pointed out that it's a pretty amateurish thing to end a letter with, "Well, I've got to go now."
Yeah.
Because you're writing a letter. You don't have to go now. You could have written it in 2 sittings. You don't have to excuse yourself. You're not actually leaving. The person can read it at their leisure. It makes no sense, and it's something that children do when they're writing a letter. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying this was a child, but it's saying it's someone who didn't have finishing formal education of the time.
Well, either that, or he's like, I've been so dramatic up to here, I don't even know how to be the most dramatic, a final flourish. So he's like, well, I've got to go back to hell. What's more dramatic than that?
After those who don't jazz it out will get the axe. He's
jazz it out.
Well, as I am cold.
Well, yeah, then I'm going to go back to the fires of hell. He's trying to end with a big bang.
The jazz thing is interesting. It's part of what has seared this into the public consciousness because people were scared of the Axeman. Mm-hmm. And because of this letter's publishing, people did, on that night, listen to jazz. They did jazz it out, and jazz was heard loudly in the neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm. And never stopped.
In fact, a few short months later, jazz musician Joseph John Davila released a piece of sheet music called The Mysterious Axeman's Jazz, parenthesis, "Don't Scare Me, Papa."
Don't scare me, Papa.
In that same year, 1919. It's a piece that he claims he wrote while waiting out the Axeman's terrible vigil on that jazz-filled night.
Do we have a recording of any version of this?
We do, and let's take a listen right now. So kind of a bop.
It's very perky.
It's definitely the most success that Davila ever saw in his career. And in fact, some true crime writers and some historians, Davis included, suggest that Davila may also have written the Axeman letter to the Times-Picayune because it would have drummed up interest for his song later that year.
Interesting. I mean, there are theories that the Jack the Ripper letters aren't by the actual killer.
I think...
Or at least some of them.
I think it's almost fully agreed that there's no way they're all real.
But I don't... That's a lot of foresight. So you create this jazz craze
he could
attached to this killer, and then you come up with a song?
Well, you send the letter out there. That's the first move. And then you see if it gets the desired effect. And if it does, everybody listens to jazz and becomes a big news story. Then you release a song that you had already written and just call it The Mysterious Axeman's Jazz now.
I mean, it is very, very perky for a song called The Mysterious Axeman's Jazz. Don't Scare Me, Papa.
Don't Scare Me, Papa. No one's scaring you in that song.
So what do you think? Do you think the Axeman really wrote that?
No, I probably not. I mean, he could have, I guess. Like BTK was that kind of an idiot. Mm-hmm. And the self-importance of it tracks.
Zodiac.
The self-importance of it tracks with a serial killer.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, I don't know. We don't have any reason. It's not like one of those ones where he gives details of the next crime or something where we have any reason to believe that the Axeman did this. He also this is the only connection this story has to jazz.
Right. It seems more of an Italian grocery story up till this point.
Danny Houston's Axeman is like carrying around a silver trumpet. That's not this guy. I think this guy might have just hated Italians.
Yeah, but it's not as fun, obviously.
No, it's not.
The only thing I love more than I hate Italians is jazz.
That's right. Now, that Tuesday night, as it turns out, came and went without incident. Mm-hmm. And there would be no more Axeman attacks until that August, when on August 10th of 1919, grocer Steve Boca says he awoke to a dark figure looming over him and then quickly lost consciousness again. When Steve woke up, he ran into the street to investigate the intruder, and it was only then that he realized he had a massive head wound.
Oh, I was going to say he just fell back to sleep?
No, he was hit in the head with an axe.
Boy, okay.
Which will make you fall asleep really quick.
Sure.
So you gotta admire his get up and go to be like he's he's across the block before he realizes there's brains coming out of his head. Mm. He ran to neighbor Frank Janusa's home before collapsing on the floor. Boca would recover from his injuries. And police found that there was nothing taken from the home, and once again, a back door panel had been chiseled away. On September 3rd, 1919, this crime also sometimes attributed to the Axeman, Sarah Lauman was found by her neighbors unconscious and missing teeth from a massive head wound. She was a young woman who lived on her own, so her neighbors came just to check on her. And they ended up breaking into her house when she didn't answer and found her lying there on the ground. Sarah said the intruder had entered through an open window and attacked her with a blunt object, but she couldn't remember anything else. There was a bloody axe found on her front lawn, and she would later recover. Now, Sarah is not a grocer nor Italian, and there wasn't the back door panel being chiseled away. Mm-hmm. So this could just be a different, separate axe attack?
Well, I mean, the chisel thing, it doesn't really throw me off, because why do all the work if you already have a window open,
right. Right, but she doesn't fit the profile of the victims, I guess.
Yeah, but there was another, it's not single, but like a woman by herself that was pregnant.
Yes.
So, doesn't seem too out of the realm of possibility.
No. I guess if this guy has two different profiles he likes to go for.
I think maybe it's just the location.
On October 27th, 1919, one last grocer was slain in New Orleans. Mike Pepitone was found by his wife after hearing a commotion in the house, covered in his own blood, his blood all over the room as well, including, she said, over their portrait of the Virgin Mary. This has been connected to the Axeman and described as an Axeman murder because of the Italian grocery connection and the time frame. But our friend Miriam Davis says this was a gun attack, that Pepitone was shot to death.
Oh.
Now, in a possibly apocryphal story, Pepitone's widow supposedly went on to shoot a man named Joseph Mumfree, or Joseph Mumfree, one or the other, either for revenge for killing her husband, or because this Mumfree went to her to extort money, quote, "or I'll kill you like I killed your husband," kind of thing. That's not our direct quote, because this story may never have happened. In this story, she was acquitted for self-defense in the murder of this Joseph Mumfree character. Now, true crime writer Colin Wilson in his encyclopedia of true crime.
We might have that.
We do. He calls this an urban legend because he can't find any record of this shooting or of Joseph Mumphrey or of anyone dying in New Orleans in that year named Joseph Mumphrey, although he does note that Mumphrey was a popular New Orleans name at the time.
Interesting.
Now, another true crime writer, J. Robert Nash, says that there was a guy in the neighborhood named Frank, quote, Doc Mumphrey, that was his nickname, who may have been a hitman, this is Nash's theory, may have been a hitman or enforcer working for the early nascent kind of organized crime families, collecting protection money from Italian grocers. The evidence for this revolves around newspaper accounts of the time do mention Frank Doc Mumphrey, or Mumphrey, again, the spelling's unsure, as the lead suspect in the shooting of a couple named Tony and Mary Chiambra. Tony and Mary were shot to death in their home in 1912 by an intruder. And this Frank Doc Mumphrey, who was investigated for that murder, also went by the alias, apparently, Leon Joseph Mumphrey. So he could have been the same one who came and shot Mike Pepitone and was ultimately, supposedly, killed by his widow. The problem with a crime from this long ago is local records aren't very good, and we don't have any rock solid on any of this. But I think this could nicely tie together at least Pepitone's murder with the murder of Tony and Mary Chiambra, and this idea of a guy running around and collecting money that was owed by these Italian families.
Or at least asking for it and then just saying, to hell with it, I've already exacted our revenge.
Yeah.
But maybe making sure they know why he's there by asking for the money.
But Davis thinks the last of the Axeman attacks in New Orleans was the August 10th attack on Steve Boca. Now, that wouldn't be the last attack against an Italian grocer with the same modus operandi in Louisiana. Joseph Sparrow and his daughter would be murdered in Alexandria, just a few miles away, in December of 1920. Giovanni Orlando in DeRidder, January 1921. And Frank Scalisi in Lake Charles, Louisiana, in April of 1921. Now, this Frank Mumphrey did die in December of 1921, supposedly, according to Nash. So if you want to put him in there as the killer, it would make sense that we can't find any crimes after that if this enforcer was just killing people who weren't paying up in time. It seems like bad business to kill so many of
You left a lot of them alive.
your loan clients.
You're just maiming some of them.
So the thing that I find more compelling is this idea of an Italian-obsessed, racist, white serial killer who probably didn't do the attacks on Schneider or Lauman or Pepitone, the two young women in that last grocer. Probably didn't do the shooting of Tony and Mary Chiambra. The rest of these aren't shootings. They're axe attacks. So those four would have been random attacks, family disputes, or, yes, vendetta among Italian immigrants, possibly with a little bit of that organized crime protection racket thing thrown in, if you want to take J. Robert Nash at his word about Frank Doc Mumphrey. The rest of the attacks paint to me a picture of a skilled professional burglar, a white man who resented growing Italian domination of the city's economy.
They hate us because they ain't us.
He would have started out stealing money from Italian businesses, feeling that they owed it to him. And these, at some point, escalated, whether it was through getting almost caught or what have you, escalated into violence and targeted murders, maybe with the intention of driving Italians out of the city with fear. It is, pretty much universally agreed that if the same guy did do all these murders, and let's be honest, Carrie, the MO, especially with the chisel...
The chisels and the axes, anything that has like both of those going on, I could see it.
So the early spree and the later spree, probably the same guy, which means he was probably locked up for other criminal activity from 1911 to 1917. So that's my take. But that is the story of the Axeman of New Orleans. There is no answer here. There's no... The Axeman likely was never caught. Well, no, the Axeman certainly was never caught. And unless it was this Mumphrey fella who was killed by Pepitone's widow, then the Axeman likely never saw justice. But he did eventually stop killing, or maybe just moved far enough away to drop off the radar.
Huh.
So, Carrie, as an Italian, as a true crime fan,
Proud Italian.
as a history buff, as everything, as Caroline Ferrante, what do you think?
Well, surprisingly, Sean, I mean, I knew the vague stuff about the Axeman, but what I really knew was about the jazz letter.
Yes, that's what people remember.
That's the thing.
And that's not the core of the story at all.
No, but that's like the fun part. Like, oh, we have to have a party so a guy won't come kill us. Like, it's very Scream, but the opposite, because they always come and kill people at the party. But
It is fun, though.
it is fun.
Until the murders.
I did not know anything about the Italian angle. And that's coming from someone who's descended from an immigrant Italian family and is very interested in true crime. So I think that's very interesting that that's kind of not really talked about. I mean, you know, once you get into it, I'm sure. But just the vague stuff, it's always like the jazz angle and the axe and New Orleans. Like those are the biggies about this case. And it's unsolved. I think I was pretty sure that was the case.
And at the time, it's not like they didn't know how to investigate this as a serial killer.
Yeah.
So, like, despite the police superintendent saying, like, I think these are all being done by the same person, you know, the one that happened the next town over, the police still just investigated that as, oh, these Italians are shooting each other again. They just didn't know how to deal with this kind of crime.
The race angle is very interesting. I think you gotta think it is probably some kind of racism situation. You don't really think of Italians with New Orleans as a dominant race in the area. But yeah, especially with that kind of escalation from such a small percentage to such a big percentage of those businesses being Italian. And maybe some people looking at it as getting above their station. I mean, I'm sure people did, but like violently, you know, because if they're working, you know, in some kind of indentured servitude at these plantations, which were recently freed of slaves, some people might have thought that, you know, they are like slaves in a way. And just like people are baselessly racist against black people for, you know, really stupid reasons. And we've talked about that recently. You know, it's just a class thing. And so it's very, very interesting to me. It makes me, you know, sad for these people because they managed to make a living in such a difficult situation. And they were probably doing fairly well. So someone felt like they had to get punished for that.
Well, that's where we're going to leave our discussion on the Axeman of New Orleans. It did make me want a nice, like a julep or a rum punch or something.
Or a muffaletta.
A muffaletta. Ooh. Yeah, now I'm hungry. Okay, a beignet. Shit. Okay, we got to book a trip to New Orleans now just to eat for 4 days.
And that's what you do, right?
That's what I do. Okay, next week we are going to keep the axe murders going. Sorry, listener.
Well, not the stories of axe murders.
The perhaps most famous axe murder in American history, the Valiska Axe Murder. And that might spin off. This might turn into a 3-parter. I can't be sure because the Valiska murder does connect us in a very interesting tangential way to potentially dozens of other family axe murders. So,
oh my.
Yeah, get all that good stuff. Axe murder fever next 2 weeks here on Ain't It Scary. I'm calling it right now.
I must ask you a question.
Yes.
Well, that was really just it. I was just making the little pun. Let's take a trip to the Bizarre Bazaar. The gong always gets me.
It's the best. Carrie, smell those spices in the air.
On March 5th, after 107 years, scientists have finally found the remains of the Endurance, the lost ship of Antarctic explorer Sir Ernest Shackleton.
Yes. This is my father's favorite person in history. Certainly favorite explorer. He was obsessed with Ernest Shackleton. So I was very excited to see this, and I actually thought about doing some an episode on Arctic and Antarctic exploration, which could be very scary.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we did the Everest stuff, so I think it totally fits in with our oeuvre.
Yeah, so listeners, let us know if you'd like to hear about that, because the things these guys dealt with, on a ship just stuck in ice for 6 months or whatever. Really, that's a terrifying situation to be in, and sort of the extreme ends of the human condition. I ended up not doing it for this week because we just did so much time with seabound horrors.
Yes. So we just, had to lighten it up with the axe murders.
3 weeks of axe murders, Carrie.
The Endurance was found at the bottom of the Weddell Sea, where it sank in 1915 after being crushed by sea ice during Shackleton's Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition, which set out to make the first land crossing of Antarctica. Shackleton and crew had been forced to escape the wreck on foot and in small boats. They camped out on the ice for a while, and then somehow they all managed to get to safety. So, spoiler alert, it's a happy ending. That's nice.
Yes. It's truly an incredible story.
Mm-hmm. The ship, having sat almost 2 miles below the surface of the water for over a century, remains in remarkable condition. It is still intact, upright, and it still has its name visible across the stern. The project to find the final resting place of the Endurance was undertaken by the Falklands Maritime Heritage Trust using an icebreaker and remotely operated submersibles. And I'm sure the icebreaker was something like 2 truths and a lie, or...
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you gotta play a nice game. What's yours?
2 truths and a lie?
Yes.
I just thought of a really good one recently because we play those Jackbox games where, it's, what is it? What's the one where...
Fibbage enough about you.
Yes. 2 truths and a lie.
Wait, we shouldn't play this because we know each other already.
Yeah, it's fair. Well, we could say it, and then our listeners can guess.
Okay.
2 truths and a lie.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Whenever I'm on the spot with things like this, I always think about how boring I am.
But you're not. You've done tons of things that nobody's done.
Like what?
I can't tell because it'll ruin the game.
I need help.
All right, listen. On our news next week, we're going to
Yes.
check back in with 2 truths and a lie.
2 truths
How
and a
about that?
lie. Icebreaker. So, it says Dr. John Shears, the mission leader, quote, "We have successfully completed the world's most difficult shipwreck search, battling constantly shifting sea ice, blizzards, and temperatures dropping down to negative 18 degrees Celsius. We have achieved what many people said was impossible."
And what Ernest Shackleton did with some dogs and holes in his shoes, or whatever.
Well, no, he didn't.
No,
he
I
didn't
know,
find
yeah.
the boat. The wreck was uncovered on the 100th anniversary of Ernest Shackleton's funeral and has been designated as a monument under the International Antarctic Treaty, meaning it cannot be disturbed in any way and no physical artifacts will be removed. So, pretty cool story.
Yeah, it would be
Nice to solve a mystery for once.
quite an ordeal to remove it anyway. I
Oh,
would
not the
imagine.
whole thing, but none of
taking
the
anything.
stuff. Whereas in the Titanic, they've taken a bunch of stuff off of there.
They had a lot of nice stuff on the Titanic. I don't know that there was like thousands of China tea sets.
No, but
on the
maybe it'd be
Endurance.
cool if it was like an old,
Dog skeleton.
What?
There's probably some of those.
That's it for this episode of Ain't It Scary with Sean and Carrie. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Ain't It Scary, and check out our newly revamped website at ain'titscary.com.
Woo!
You can support the show by supporting our sponsors and becoming a patron at www.patreon.com/ain'titscary. And please subscribe to the show and throw us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and also now on Spotify. We'll be forever grateful.
Special thanks to our beloved top-tier patrons, Nate Curtis, Sean O'Donnell, Jared Chamberlain, Maria Ferrante, Robin McCabe, Comfy Mike, Alex Nakutis, Ryan Regan, and Christy Atchison. Come and join us over there. We're having a ton of fun. And coming up soon, we've got some really grim minisodes on the 10th Electron and Carla Faye Tucker to tie in with our Axe content. And because it is Axe Month, of course. And... Call of Cthulhu Part 3 as well. So tons of stuff coming on Patreon. Come over, get at us, and enjoy. More importantly than that, honestly, just share this thing, tell your friends about it, steal their phones, and subscribe for them.
Mm-hmm. See you next Thursday.
Show created by Sean and Carrie McCabe, music by Kyle Ryan. You can find Kyle at his YouTube channel, Music is a Verb.
This has been a production of Longboy Media.
You awaken in a cold sweat. Your heart races, and your breath quickens. It's 3 a.m., and you're not alone. Something lurks in the corner of the room, and it's darker than the night.
The people are real, and the stories are legend.
The problem is that legends are often riddled in myth.
We uncover the truth and define paranormal. Tune into Paratruth Radio at killerpodcast.com, powered by Evergreen Podcasts, or wherever great podcasts are heard.